Morning, everyone. So hopefully just to facilitate the day a little bit, to make sure that we get as much out of it as possible. It's great to see so many great companies here and interesting people. So I guess it's not getting any easier to manage the businesses that we work in. We're getting ever more complicated, ever more multidimensional, larger. At the same time, the world's getting more connected, smaller in many respects. And so really, how do we scale ourselves and our organizations globally or across borders and regions as our customers get ever more demanding, and we need to find ways of reinventing ourselves and delivering products and services that are relevant in the way in which they want them? What does this mean for us as businesses? And of course, the other thing here is that we're in a digital age. We've got so much more access to data. We've got so much greater scrutiny in everything that we do. How do we handle all of these things? So when we talk about the next generation workforce, what does that mean? There are so many different aspects to that. How do we structure ourselves as a business? What kind of constructs we put in when we try and communicate? How do we make this human? How do we bring all of these things together? Sorry, is it me or is that coming on and off? How do we bring all of these things together when we've already got so many different things to do? There are so many priorities around the place that whether we're in talent, HR, property, IT, there's so many different demands in our time that it's becoming a real challenge to be able to prioritize those things. So anyway, there's some fantastic people here. We've got some great speakers lined up. And hopefully it just gives us a chance to take a step back, have a think about some of the things that we all individually know, and hopefully as we talk through some of our collective experiences, we'll be able to pool and share that knowledge. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce the first session, which in the spirit of the day is a conversation and a chat rather than a tedious PowerPoint presentation, which is great. So the first, we've got Chris Kane, who's the CEO of BBC Projects, and Caroline Walters, who's the founder of CW Consulting Box. And this is going to be chaired by Nigel Roberts. So over to you guys. Thanks.
Yes, so it's a conversation which I hope you'll find illuminating, and I hope you'll also take part in it. We're going to spend the first part of this. I'm going to ask some questions to sort of, if you like, to set out the manifesto, and then open it up to you to ask any questions. If at some point you feel that you've got a burning issue you want to raise, please feel free to stick your hand up and say, I'd like to follow up on that. And we will have a microphone which will come and find you, and so we can record your question, and then we can continue the conversation like that. So it's a big conversation. And actually, if you think about it, the very fact that we've got sitting here, we have the place guy, who is basically in charge of commercial property, the building, the fabric of the building, and we have the HR lady, who is sitting there in charge of the people.
No stereotyping there, then.
No, well, I'm saying this for a reason. And actually, and if you look at this, it's the sort of the people and the place, and the process is sort of floating around. It'd be quite unusual to find these two even talking to each other, because I think to a certain extent the old way of doing things is very much a siloed-based approach. And would you two actually have had conversations in your various iterations at BT and at the BBC? Would you have actually willingly sought out each other?
Ladies first.
Yes, I did, because I realised that I'm the people person. I'm supposed to be getting better productivity, more creativity out of the people, but actually their real lived experience is in the building, and then it was in the building virtually every day. So and also, we were seeing technology changing at an absolutely unprecedented pace, and it was having a fundamental impact on not just how people worked, but how they felt about work. So it seemed inconceivable to me that I could do my job without talking to the people who really got the place stuff, who understood the fabric of the buildings, and the technology people. So yeah, I started to initiate those conversations, clumsily at first, because I didn't know what was possible. That nobody had done this before. But what I did know was that there was no good, having HR people like me. We often talk a lot of nonsense about wanting to recruit the best people. And then what we forget is that the best people actually can't do anything unless you're talking to them. So I knew we'd got some really great people in our property skills area. I knew we'd got some of the world's best technologists. But I wasn't going to get anything out of them unless I actually spoke to them.
And so was that your experience as well at the BBC when you were brought in? You had some very big projects, property projects to undergo. Was there this kind of collaborative approach where people talking to each other, or were they stuck in their silos?
I think it was the latter. I think I learned a lot around. My world was the world of driving performance out of the building, and what I've learned over the last 20 years, it's really about driving business performance and using the built environment to enable great businesses, both public and private sector, to do great things. And it's ironic in a sense, in that where I first learned all of this was from BT, because I had the good fortune to provide in another world the input to the original BT WorkStyle 2000 projects back in 1990, 91. And there you came at it from a traditional property perspective. And I'll come back to the world of property in a moment, which is much more fragmented in HR. But there, there's this huge move towards flexible working and doing very different things to the building. And you had to teach yourself that there is a bigger world outside of what I would call traditional mindset of property. Because within property itself, and one of the challenges from a HR perspective, from a people perspective, is that we're a very difficult body of people to engage with, because if you think in the world of people, you have a set of topics, you speak a particular language. Well, in the world of place, of property, there are actually 3 different tribes, 3 different cultures, 3 different mindsets. I would call them, the tribe of the people who do the property deals, the surveying world, the core group then, which are the people who actually operate buildings on a day-to-day basis, which are the group of people traditionally labelled as facility or estate or premises managers, which have the greatest interaction with the business and indeed with HR. And then the third group, excuse me, are the people who change things, who do projects, designers, contractors, advisors. And, excuse me, architects believe that they are designing a building for themselves. And I've had the experience, certainly the BBC, of having some interesting discussions with large architects who thought the building was their baby. Buildings are put on this sort of in place basically to enable businesses to deliver profit and value to their shareholders. And much of the property industry doesn't understand that. So it's been a real long learning journey, and I think when Caroline and my path sort of first crossed, it was around me making the decision that I needed to learn more about people. And it's been a very interesting journey so far. And over the last 20 years, we've always tried to build a collaborative team, from setting up international Disney channels where we worked as a team of people, where we left the silos outside and worked around where could you find the talent to put into a new channel in a new building with the technology that worked. And then we've been working the last 10 years at the Beeb to try and harness the ability. If you're going to invest £2 billion in new buildings, you should get an even higher return than just the utility of the building. And I think that's where Mark Thompson, when he led the transformational change from 2004 onwards, he recognised that moving to new space is a wonderful opportunity. It's a real catalyst. And the BBC Media City example in Salford, as you've seen, Nigel, is one where we've really put creativity on speed and the change management. And the mantra Mark Thompson gave us was he wanted not only a greenfield site but a greenfield organisation. And one, the new buildings, the new place enable the other, and vice versa.
So the advantage there was that there was no legacy that you had to build upon. But I mean, it's a nice concept, the idea of going from being place-centric where you've got the investment and you want to make sure you get the return, and that's where the value is, to realising that actually the people are that create the real value. So moving to a people-centric process. All right, you had Mark Thompson, so in that sense he was visionary, but it was still, I imagine, quite hard because the various tribes within the BBC and within BT were probably not prepared to play ball.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and these are definite silos, and we're kind of, what happened, I think, is that we all over-professionalised our profession, and we developed a language that was, kept everybody else out. So we had, when you are so focused on your profession and what you do, you begin to forget why you are doing it. And I think this was a genuine attempt to say, well, actually, property doesn't have a purpose in itself. It's a cost. Actually, what we need to do is we need to look at it and say, how do you get value for money from that cost? And that has to be about that space either becoming the motivator, creating new possibilities for how people can work together and encouraging them to come together, or it has to be about returning money to the bottom line. And in effect, what we did at BT was both. So by changing the structure of the building, moving away from thinking about buildings just as buildings, and actually saying, what are we going to be doing in them? What are the functions that the people who are going to be there will be like? And how do you optimise performance in that? So we started to look at jobs as a whole series of tasks and understand when that task was about interaction, when you needed some peace and quiet to do something. And in fact, was a busy office the right place to try and work quietly like that? Was it the right place to create kind of open plan space where people could work together, or should that be done in a different way? So when we focused on what was the output all about and started to break down that kind of mystery that each of us professions had built up about what we did, and said, well, you know what, actually, if I don't put any people in your building's nothing, isn't it? There's no point in it. If I put my people somewhere else, we've still got to make them perform. That's the important thing. So the only purpose for space is to improve the performance of the business, however your business defines that. In a technology industry where our products and services, we have about 11 weeks. If we invent something and launch it onto the market, it's about 11 weeks before a competitor has launched something better. That's just the truth of it. So we've got that time, just that short time. And actually, in that time, technology can advance twice. So, this was a high-speed environment. We couldn't go on just, taking 2-3 years to develop a building and then not know what the heck it was going to do for us. So that's where it came from. It came from a business perspective, a bottom line. And I think this was one of the first times that the support world suddenly realised that our best interests, the future of HR, the future of property, the future of technology, was actually about proving that we added value to the business.
But one of the problems there, is that's looking at it from the business point of view and getting the products to market. But and this is something that you feel very strongly about, that the nature of work is changing, and that the place you go to work is literally and metaphorically no longer set in stone, because it may not actually be a big building.
And this is where, I was brought up to really love creating buildings, doing big projects. But in essence, what we've learned over the last 10, 15 years is that, you can work anywhere in the main for most people, but yet we're hampered by, trying to operate in the 21st century with a 20th century mindset as a legacy, particularly around buildings, and this whole concept of being tethered to one particular desk. And, I've been very fortunate in that, the BBC it's a hugely privileged organisation. It's one which I think Britain should be hugely proud of, but also, as in the case of large organisations, when you have guaranteed revenues coming in of 3.6 billion, it leads people to be somewhat complacent versus, the hard-nosed revenue bottom-line world that most people exist within. But it did have its come to Jesus moments about 5-10 years ago, when it realised that as the nation's broadcaster, which had been very successful over 7-8 decades, this whole revolution, that is the digital revolution, was coming, and it was coming fast and hard. And how would an organisation deal with this, and along with all the other aspects, the changing nature of the global economy, all of those other big macro aspects hit home very forcefully. And with Mark's leadership, he said we had to move from analog to digital as quickly as is humanly possible. Now, if you've got 20,000+ people, most of whom at an average age tenure in the organisation of 16 to 17 years, no experience of the big bad world, that's quite a tanker to shift around, particularly given that there is no bottom line imperative. So it was quite the best example was New Broadcasting House, £1 billion investment, which started as a property exercise to consolidate buildings and to deal with lease expiries, which Mark turned into a transformational exercise, and to harness the power of good design. Okay, we had a few problems with the first phase, but it's now a real hub and enabler of creativity, and people are proud to be working there, notwithstanding the fact that some of our television colleagues seem to want to change the carpets after 18 months in, but such is life.
Yeah, and of course that's keeping the talent there and attracting the talent. Because there were some things that you think are the main issues today, which is talent, value, collaboration, and engagement, and actually using the buildings and the space, creating the space to enable people to do their best work, to feel connected, to attract them, but also to make sure that you keep them. Because the big issue is that your greatest asset, your talent, disappears out of the front door every night. Now, in the new world that we're talking about, it may not be the same front door. It could be a digital, it could be a virtual front door. So, and that's a big challenge. That how do you create the personal space? How do you create the physical space, which is going to keep them anchored, keep your assets in-house? How do you do that?
As an organisation, BT had the strapline, it's good to talk, for a number of years. And what we actually realised is it's better to listen. So we actually spoke to our people about what it was that they valued about work. And, it's probably true for all of us. It was fairly simple things. Some autonomy about when and where they worked. They were all pretty committed people. We had seen a fundamental change. You think about some of the volcanoes that were going off in the background, globalisation, in the telecoms industry, liberalisation of markets, and that was true in your industry as well. Competition with globalisation comes the fact that price becomes incredibly important. Technology was developing faster than we could figure out how to use it. And you'd got actually a much more demanding society. So at one time it was okay for BT to call people subscribers and to tell them when they were going to get the product. By that stage, if you didn't say, right, when would you like it, and there will be somebody there to provide it for you, then they just could go off somewhere else and get somebody else to do it. So your business was dead if you didn't react to those things. And actually understanding what would keep the critical talent that you put so much effort into finding in your business was literally quite simple. Train me properly so that I feel confident about what I do. Give me some autonomy so that I can work when I feel I work best. And give me the space and the tools, generally tools are technology, to do the job well. And actually that's what our people told us. So that led us to develop lots of different forms of flexible working and start to look at sitting down with our property colleagues, with our technology colleagues and saying, okay, people are going to be moving around, therefore they don't want to have to find somewhere to plug in. So when you walk in, it has to be always available. It has to know who you are. I have to be able to, in my day, I don't do the same thing all day. I have to be able to find a space where I can have a one-to-one conversation with a colleague about performance, or maybe a difficult discussion about pay or something like that. I have to have a space where I can brief my team. I have to have a space and the right kit and the right technology, because we're a technology business, to showcase something for a client I'm bringing in. The space has to do all of those things. If you give me those things, I will be good at what I do, and if I'm good at what I do, I will be happy. If you give me some autonomy about that, that will make a big difference. 93% of BT people said that flexible working and the ability to choose, to have some control over when they worked, had a profound impact on their quality of life. As soon as we introduced that flexibility, we got much greater engagement, much higher engagement scores on all of the staff surveys. And guess what? The more engaged people became, the more productive they became. And that, when you feel like you're doing a good job, when you're relaxed, when actually doing your work is quite pleasant, you get to meet with colleagues, but you also have me time, then that keeps you there, that keeps you happy.
Yeah. So that's great. It's great for you.
Great for business.
Great for the consumer. It's a real pain for people like you, because you think, okay, we've got this space, and there's a sizable investment in it. We're doing hot desking, flexible working. You know, how can we make sure that there are going to be enough spaces where you can have personal conversations, where you can have group meetings, you can have chill-out space, and that you're not going to end up with sort of acres and acres of empty desks? How do you do that? Because in a sense, what you're doing is you're trying to squeeze a pint pot into, or a quart into a pint pot. You know, you actually reduce the amount of space that you've got available there, but you may actually have more people that are working flexibly. But how do you ensure that you can cope with the peaks and the troughs?
Yes. I think the traditional industry standard response is, it's driving efficiency. What we learned over the last 10 years was you not only have to think about efficiency, and for my world that's about, as you say, cutting costs, driving more people per square metre and filling people's spaces up. But it's not. It's really about, you have to be efficient, but also you have to be effective. And effectiveness is not just about the building, it's about the business and about making the link. And what we did at the BBC was we sort of created an equation, sort of efficiency plus effectiveness equals creativity. And we had as a function, and property, facilities, construction people speaking three different dialects of a language to people outside of our world find incomprehensible. Is it square meters? Is it square feet? Just to give you one example, the British property construction industry values and sells in square feet, but it constructs in square meters. As with all professions, we have probably a set of acronyms and jargons to beat the band, and some of this stuff from NIA to NOA to OEU to HVAC. What does that really mean to people in the business? And but one of the things that the BBC needed to do was to move from analog to digital, and that meant that we had to work up a joint strategy with technology and with people, because I think, as similar to BT, the BBC changed its HR department to call it BBC People many years back, and it was around thinking about the creative workplace. And creative workplace in many aspects was one which was technology enabled, but where people could plug and play. But the real challenge was the cultural challenge of taking the vast number of highly creative folk who are be journalists or program makers or whatever on that change journey. So Broadcasting House in central London is the best example of that, where we fundamentally restructured the project team in 2006, and I took a step back as the building lead, and we found somebody with an editorial background to be the program lead. and we placed as much emphasis on training. I think there was something like 44,000 days of training over 3 years to enable people to take on board the new digital technology and to begin the journey towards working together in what is a very efficient space, but the effectiveness quotient is even greater, whereby people can be much more creative. The best example of that is, most of us in this room are native English speakers, and we tend to be quite inward in our perspective, even if you do have a global role. But if you have the opportunity of working in a building and going up and down the lifts and going for a cup of coffee where there are many other people speaking 27 different other languages, that actually makes for a huge difference in how your perspective is. Or if you're a journalist broadcasting on BBC London and who wishes to speak about something, say, connected with Afghanistan, instead of fumbling around for relevant journalistic insight, that individual can now go upstairs and speak to somebody who is very au fait with what's going on in Baghdad. That creative dividend you can't put a price on.
It's always a difficult question, because we're talking very much in terms of value. It's a bit conceptual, put it that way. And of course, what organisations like to have is some measure of the value that you're actually adding. How do you, as an HR person, how do you measure the value and therefore the success of a major project like the one you're involved in at BT?
Well, we actually work together as a community across property, HR, technology, and actually brand as well. But what we did was we said, okay, what are the normal KPIs? Because the thing I've learnt as a HR person is if I want my business to listen to me, I have to be able to speak in the language that it normally uses. So BT, very, ex-engineering business, very... God, did they do data? Very, very performance indicator, task-driven. So we developed a language around flexible working that was about productivity, and we could show that where we introduced flexible working, we saw 15 to 31% productivity increases. It was averaging out at over 20%. Now, when you related that to the front line, if you think about Openreach and engineers, the guys that go up the poles and down the holes, it meant that we're about 1 million more customers, and BT had about 30 million customers at that time, were getting an appointment when they wanted it. Now, when you can play back something as profound as that to your board, you've got their attention. And we saw productivity on the front line of 5%. Now, any of you who work with field forces know how difficult it is to squeeze out half a percentage point of productivity. We'll know just how big that was. So talking in that language. And, of course, the other language that business loves is money. Not something that HR is usually too good at talking about. We usually like spending it. But what I did learn was that if I could position some of this in sense of cost saving and investment, it would make a big difference. So we started to measure the actual cost of the portfolio, the property portfolio, and we saw a £500 million decrease by taking out that wasted space and by being brave. So we knew that there were going to be times when we probably wouldn't have enough space. But why on earth would you base your strategy on those one or two times? Don't you rely on your people? Because, the one thing we remembered was, A, that we were hiring adults, and they usually figure stuff out. B, for every pair of hands we hired, we got a free brain. So if we just set it out for people, they would figure it out. And we were also learning at the same time that, you can't do this in isolation. So as we were pushing down the technology route and turning that dial up, we were seeing things like the use of conferencing. And, I think probably PT uses it a bit too much, but we saved £230 million in shifting from face-to-face meetings, which needed buildings which needed people to travel to them. And we cut out about 800,000 meetings a year. Can you believe that? I mean, we were a big company. We're about 150,000 people, So, but you do that, and the great thing as well was that reduced the amount of travelling that people were doing by about 40 million miles over the course of that year. You think of the CO2 emissions that we weren't pumping into the economy, and we were able to have that conversation with our employees. So it became something else that people felt valued about what they were doing. So, it was understanding that, yes, we'd still got all of those people, but actually the way they were working and technology was enabling us to move away from worrying just about space. And actually, if you cut your costs down by 500 million, if you get it wrong once or now and then, there's a bit of forgiveness in the organisation.
So what about your metrics? How do you measure that, a happy, successful, creative organisation? I mean, normally it would have been basically what the asset value has gone up by, what the cost of running those buildings has gone down by. But there are some quite startling other statistics which kind of support your case.
I guess the default is always going to go back to what I would call tactical issues in terms of the cost of the portfolio, the cost per square feet, square metre, how much it costs to move people around, and all that side of things. But that's not good enough, because you really need to link it with the performance of the particular business, and that goes back to the effectiveness issue. And what we strove very hard to do was to really understand the nature of the business of broadcasting, and to work really, really hard to get people whose language is very technical in nature to understand that if the news at 10 doesn't go out every night precisely at 10, then there's a problem. And I had the privilege of being responsible for a group of nearly 2,500 people all over the UK. And we had to make sure that everyone understood their role in that. And we adopted over the last 10 years a very simple mantra. It was called, stay on air and don't kill anybody. And I was chastised by many of our colleagues in the health and safety world, surely you've got it wrong. And we didn't, because you had to understand the nature of the business we were supporting. And from the Alan Yentobs down to all the other folk, to the Hugh Edwards, it's all about the show. And in the case of the BBC, that was about ensuring that a 24/7 operation, you had to have 99.99% resilience. It didn't matter. And that was really important. And when the consumers of our service saw that, and saw that we were building a higher level of capability and of people who would jump when there was a problem, if there was any risk to the show in terms of providing services and stuff, we gained huge amounts of credibility. But also then the issue around how one supports creativity and program making, it's really just understanding how programs get made, whether it's a news program or it's a drama or it's on location. And rather than being the traditional, the computer says no because it's a not policy, etc., we work very hard within reason to enable things to be done, because most creative programs, you can look at W1A on a Wednesday night and see, an organisation making fun of itself, and I think it's a very healthy thing to do. Some others would totally disagree with it.
But beyond that,
Yeah.
I noticed that I asked you a question about what were the targets, and you actually didn't mention the metrics. But this is a leading question. But the reality was that you actually aimed for it in a different way, rather than having targets for cost reduction, return on investment, and whatever. You actually had a much more holistic approach.
Yeah.
But the byproduct of that was that, in terms of the figures, you reduced costs. You made.
Yeah, but
it was actually very good from a financial point of view as well, wasn't it?
Well, we took 30% of the total BBC estate out of the equation, and there's another 10% in the pipeline for disposal, by simply understanding how to make the best use of space, not having huge surpluses, driving for efficiency. And because we're not a bottom line organisation, what we used, all those what I would call tactical measures, rates per square metre, utilisation, all that sort of things. We did gather the data, and believe you me, in a high testosterone, ego-driven culture, which is partially heavily unionised, it wasn't an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. But once we got the data, we used, with help from our friends and BBC People, the good old peer pressure tool of saying, okay, Mr. Television, you're 20% over the industry standard, and Mr. Radio, you're 10%, and Miss Online, you're a high performer because all your people are operating to the standard. So we used metrics in a different way, because in my world we believe that the search for some measure for productivity is a holy grail. Well, are we looking at the wrong thing?
Yeah, so in a sense what we've got here is a move to making everything strategic rather than tactical. Let's just, in the 10 minutes we have left, I'd like to throw it open to any questions that are raised, because I want to just go back to one final point with the two here. But any questions so far that you'd like to address to the august panel here?
Really tactical one, actually, from what you said. Over what time period was that 30% reduction? I mean, that's a heck of a swing.
About 2006 to 2012, 6 years.
So 6 years.
Yeah. The other thing I would add in my learning journey is that most of us are all under the cosh to drive innovation and change. And we have to do this, and you have to do it by Tuesday a week. Not possible. Change, my experience, is fundamentally a very slow burn process. And you need to have a lot of luck and a lot of serendipity, if you will, around a whole raft of things to make it possible. You can't do change within 2 years. And if you think about the average tenure of most CEOs and stuff like that, they're going to be they have to be educated to the reality that it's a difficult task.
I mean, having had the experience now of creating change, I think it can be done much quicker, actually, because so many of the things are aligned. You know, there is an expectation amongst people that they can work flexibly, because you do everything else flexibly. You know, you don't go to the bank anymore to do your banking. You don't have to go to the shop to make your purchases. So I think, you know, you can actually create change much more quickly now. So I would say, I mean, BT took about 10 years to go from 300 home-based workers to 2,000. And then in the next 3 years, it went to 15,000 home-based workers.
2006, 2007?
No, we hit 2,000 home workers in the year 2000. We had an It's OK Too programme. But then the growth after that was exponential, because people suddenly got it. And there was there was a burning platform in the business to cut fixed costs. So the two things came together. Plus, I think, a growing sophistication about the understanding of how you get better performance out of people. You know, when all of those things came together. I mean, just as an example, what we were finding was that real business problems were tackled by this new form of working. So we had a 63% reduction in stress-related absences where there was flexible working. Now, if you think how much those absences cost your business and the impact that they have, not just on that person, but on a broader team, you can see that's a real incentive to then introduce that change broadly. So as things were seen to work, as they were seen, to Chris's point, to be effective through a whole range of metrics, then the rollout got faster and faster, because that's what business does.
I have one question for this forum. What I've started to notice in the last year or two is that most of us of a certain generation, shall we say, we're all accustomed to driving, leading, top-down. I'm wondering whether there is now significant indicators that change actually will be driven from the bottom up. And the example I can cite is that organisationally, when the BBC understood that it had to deal with this thing called future media, and the collision of radio and television with the world of online. It did something quite classic, quite binary. It said, okay, BBC Technology now becomes BBC Technology and Future Media. And there were, I think, maybe 1,000 new folk brought on board, mainly to drive websites, online tools, to be part of the group of people who created the BBC iPlayer. Funny old thing, though, they were mostly under 25. And when they arrived at the organisation and discovered, yes, here's your laptop and it's Windows-based, and here's your set of rules and regulations. Well, you can have open plan and all that, that'll be fine. There was a minor revolt in terms of the bring your own device phenomena kicked in spades. 3-4 years on, BBC Technology and Future Media is no longer a division. The Future Media group have been hived off. Interesting, though, hived off to be part of Future Strategy. What does that tell you?
Is there any questions coming out from that you want to raise? Okay, well, so that as we sort of just conclude this, I'd like to focus a little bit on two things that I know that you are very strong on: the idea of convergence squared and the smart approach. What is that? How does that work? Because what you're really talking about is a kind of convergence.
Yeah.
But how do you manage that? How do you make it work? How do you use the physical fabric of an organisation to get all these silos broken down and to get the different strands all converging?
Well, I think all of us in our roles of supporting business, we're all being driven to help organisations do three things: to support organisations to be much more agile than ever before, to inject as much as possible creativity, whatever that means, to various organisations, and to innovate like hell. And if you think about all of these buzzwords, everybody is faced with these challenges day in, day out. And yes, if you look at it through a different lens, but how do we collectively support and enable business, whether that's business that is a bottom line business, that is a public service, or indeed as part of government or any other manufacturing factory, all that side of things. So if you take a systems thinking approach to all of this and look at all the bits of the jigsaw, my home world, if you will, of property, as I explained earlier, is full of people who love to complain and compete with one another, which means that those looking in find it a very complicated, a very complex, and a very costly world to engage with. But the reality is that business, the macro side of things, for a whole variety of reasons, CSR was something that Caroline and I have talked about a lot. It has been irrelevant in recent times because of the economic situation. Well, I think it's going to come back with a bang, because it's all about organizations and meaning and how you can, to the bottom line, attract and retain talent. So I believe there's a convergence required in my world, but also my world colliding, converging with the world I think most people in this audience are, which is, people, professionals, talent, development, creators and curators, and then to the third silo, which is the silo of process and technology. And there's probably a number of other bigger extraneous areas where convergence should also take place in the world of brand, in the world of community. We do need to engage with finance and procurement, because many of us perceive those folk in that world as blockers. In reality, I think what's happening is that we've all been brought up in a binary, linear world, and actually we are now today living in a networked world.
Yeah, absolutely, but I'm HR, so my world's about making things simple. If the bottom line is that to create effective businesses and effective organisations, because public sector has just a bigger role as anybody else to play in this, a bigger stake in it. If we believe that effectiveness is what we're trying to do, and effectiveness has, whatever metrics, it really doesn't matter how you measure it in your organisation, because actually you need to be able to make sure that the business feels that the measures are really relevant. So they probably need to be built by you and the business, you know, taking a kind of Chinese menu approach to the stuff that's already out there. But if you believe that, then one of the things that has to happen is that you have to attract great people. You have to enable them to work together, and that's the bit that often gets forgotten. People go out there and they recruit great people, and then they leave them. Or they recruit them because they're different, and then they say, OK, now you need to conform. So to get the benefit out of the great people that you're recruiting, you have to enable them to be able to communicate with people in your organisation and more with your consumer, because, you know, we are moving globally. One of those big volcanoes is actually co-development. So if you look at big organisations like BT, like Apple, more and more things, they are just selling capability. And the end user is building what they want with that. Now, how do you actually compete with that? How do you draw that co-production into your organisation? So that piece is incredibly important. So if we believe that in order to do that, in order to make business effective, we have to get those people, we have to enable them to communicate internally, externally. They have to feel engaged in what the business is doing. Then actually we have to take into account that that's people, the tools that you give them, and it's the environment that you put them into. And that means that we can't work in silos anymore. People who do will not produce the most effective businesses. Businesses, organisations that are ineffective are like dinosaurs. They die out, they get taken up by other organisations. So that's, if we believe that, then we really have to move to a converged model, because there's no other way.
And Chris, finally, would it be fair to say this is not a wake-up call? This is not something that, you know, we ought to think about. You've either got to do it or die.
Yeah.
Well, I think business is under so much pressure, and there are so many unknowns out there, and given I think the impatience of CEOs and boards, I think it behoves us to really get on and just have a big conversation around what the art of the possible is, how we can make for a more meaningful contribution to business, but also to community and society as a whole.
Yeah. And there's one point that I know we were talking about before the session, which I think is probably an appropriate point to leave. You were painting a rather apocalyptic picture of you know, we can't compete in Western Europe, in the UK, we can't compete on cost anymore.
Yeah.
But you know, if we don't do something about it, in 10 years' time, we're not going to be able to compete in terms of skills either. Final thoughts on that?
The world has become a very small place. There are lots of people who believe that, you know, London is the envy of the world, Britain is, you know, a first world nation, but it has to realise that, you know, there's lots of people out there who seek to compete, and competition is a compete or die.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is, because one of the upsides and maybe one of the downsides in terms of national economies is that flexibility in technology means that I can move work wherever there's a labour force, and I can also seed work. So I don't even need a static workforce anymore. I can just seed work on the net, and it will get done. And also, organisations are becoming porous. So the real challenge for the UK is, what will define us? We're not a manufacturing country anymore. About 22 million people in the UK work in the service industry. Service industry generally has low margin, and we can't compete on price. So we compete on skill generally, developed in this country. But if you look at somewhere like China, in just 10 years they've moved their economy from about 50 billion in terms of development to over 700 billion. They're developing, and they're cheap, and they have an absolutely incredible stream of graduates and highly skilled people. What is it that this country, this nation, is going to compete on? I think that's a very important question. And I think the answer is, if we get it right, it's about our innovation and our creativity. And I think that's what the future is for this nation. But that requires people who are well-educated, skilled, who can draw down the knowledge that they need and apply it quickly, and who are commercial. Because there's no point having a great idea if you can't make any money out of it.
And they're also doing it within an environment which actually enables them to develop those skills and do it.
Exactly.
So that's, I think, a fitting place to finish. I'd like to thank Caroline Waters and Chris Kane for their insights. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks everyone. Really appreciated that. So next week.
in a variety of different organisations. But about half of my career in wider business roles. So I've worked in capital investment. I've actually worked in building. Actually, I've built factories for a number of years. I've designed parts for aircraft. I have worked in pet food manufacture. I've worked in travel and leisure. I've worked in financial services. So I guess you could look at it a couple of ways. Either I've got a reasonably diverse background, or I just can't hold down a job. But either way, I think it's flavoured my my view on life. Do I need to stay away from this speaker? It sounds like there's a bit of an echo going on. Yeah. So if I come over the other side of the room, it's probably a bit safer. Can you hear me a bit better now? Yeah? Okay, great. So it's a rather intriguing title, and hopefully I can live up to it a little bit. One thing I would say is I put on there, or we've talked about in the brochure, sort of future talent. I think some of what I'm going to say is just as relevant right now, because actually some of the stuff I'm talking about, or going to be talking about, is kind of here already. And I think it's posing some interesting challenges. And also I'm going to make some connections as well to the previous discussion, because what you'll see is some of the things which have been talked about just in the previous session are going to sort of reappear a little bit in some of this in a slightly different way, with much more of a sort of a talent-centric focus. But maybe you can see some of the common trends in there as well. So I'm going to talk for about, I think we've got 45 minutes. We'll probably talk for about half an hour, and then we can do some sort of questions and stuff, or I can take any questions as we go through. So let's keep it a conversation like this. So I said that I have this sort of mongrel upbringing, which I won't go over again. Let me just talk about what I do now, though. I have two hats that I wear now, both of which I guess are allow me a bit of a different perspective on the world. So one is that I have my own business, so I go around the world working with boards and HR teams on things like organisational capability, strategic workforce planning, metrics, HR effectiveness. But the other one is that I run part of Henley Business School. So myself and a colleague who's also called Nick, we keep it simple, we run something rather grandly called the Centre for HR Excellence at Henley Business School, which is a pretentious way of saying that we do give a damn about HR and its role in business. We think it's absolutely vital. But we also think that, rather like some of the slides that we saw earlier, the world is really changing around HR, and it's kind of making our role very different. It's making our role much more challenging, making our role much more complex, and we have to react to that. So really what we try and do is we work on the gap, trying to help HR functions understand how is their role changing, how do they need to sort of look at what they do or how they do it, and the individual or functional skills that they bring to bear to react to that. And so we do a bit of research, we do a bit of sort of program and upskilling, do quite a lot of consulting work. But today, I wanted to talk about something which I guess might be just slightly provocational. And where it comes from is the more that I've gone around the world working with organisations like yours, working with people like you, kind of looking through everybody's kitchen windows, see what they've done with the place, the more I've been sort of hit by this paradox, this kind of apparent conflict, that we come to lots of conferences like this, and I go to lots. I'm sure you go to many as well over the course of your career, and we talk about how the world is changing, rather like the last discussion. When you then go back to your organisations, are we actually adapting our approaches in the same way that we're talking about the change? And so what I wanted to do was really just talk about 3 or 4 examples of this. So what I'm going to show you is kind of taken from a day-long debate that we did with about 100 people a few weeks ago. And I've tried to sort of boil that down to 30 minutes, so bear with me on that one. It's not just going to be I'm just going to talk quicker. I have actually taken some content out, you'll be glad to know. But I'm just going to pick 3 or 4 of these gaps. But really it's about this. There's some external trends out there around talent that I think we'll recognise, and we probably do talk about quite a lot. We've then got our own understanding of how our own organisations are going to need to change and how that translates to talent. And then we've got this piece around, well, okay, we have our processes, our tools, our approaches, our conversations around talent, whether they be talent development reviews, definitions of potential, development activities, coaching, whatever. And to what degree are they actually all glued together? Rather like the silo picture that we were seeing earlier, to what degree have we converged these together? And my impression, I'm going to dare to go a little closer to our speaker now. My impression is that there's a bit of a gap on some of these, that we can come to something like today and all agree that something out there is going on, and then go back into our businesses tomorrow and kind of pick up where we left off 10 years ago. And I think this is probably almost the people metaphor for some of the conversations that we had about technology. We will, in our houses, use technology in a particular way. But when we come into our organisations, we use technology that's maybe 10, 15 years behind, and we think that's absolutely fine. It's just normal. It's what we do. So I've noticed some of you are taking notes with pens. Some of you are taking notes on iPads. We do this very differently. But when we enter the world of work, when we go through either the virtual or the physical door of our organisation, we're almost faced with a different set of things. And we just go, it's fine. But there are some changes out there which are probably going to mean that the next group coming in may not react like that. And I was interested to hear the BBC example about people coming in to support the digital business and saying, well, here's your coal-driven laptop. Go off and create this fantastic new digital business. It's like, sorry, what is this? I have 2 children. They're 11 and 9. I thought I'd have to explain to my children what vinyl was. Yeah, actually, do anyone here not know what vinyl? Yeah. Actually, I'll have to explain to my children what CDs were. And actually, even things like little mobile MP3 players. It's like, well, why do you carry that around with you when you can just stream? So the world is changing very, very quickly. I just want to explore just 4 examples. There are many examples, and I'd love to hear if you have any better examples. Let's hear them. Okay, does that make some sense? Great. So let's go straight into one of them. One of them is about career. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to take this off because I think it's not exactly a big room. Yeah, there you are. See, I've adapted to technology already. But I've gone the other way. Yeah, I've gone backwards. Yeah. I want to talk about career mindset. Has anyone here not heard expressions like portfolio career? Yeah, exactly. These are things that we talk about a lot. We talk about the next generation of talent. We talk about gen this, gen that. I was doing some research recently around talent, and somebody came up with this lovely phrase, which was actually this view that top talent is collecting scout badges. And I quite like that, actually, because one of the things that is happening out there, particularly in markets like the UK, which tend to be experience-based markets, this is not a global phenomenon, but it is becoming one, potentially, is that this old notion of I am beholden to an employer. I will go and, like my parents would have done, I will go and spend 35 years working for one employer, is kind of a misnomer now. There is this, particularly with top talent, this piece around, I know what I want to get, I know what I'm going to need to give, and actually I'm going to put the two together for a period of time, and then I'm going to move on and do it again. So I'm kind of assembling this portfolio of experience, which is going to help me pull together that sort of career life jigsaw that I want to have. And so you see some of these things on the left. You see the rise of the portfolio career. I was asking some people recently, I said, what do you think is the minimum amount of time you can have on a CV before people get a bit twitchy? Right, it's about 100 HR professionals. What do you think they said? The minimum amount of time that you can have in a particular company.
3 years.
Yeah, they said 2 years. They said at a push 18 months, but I need a reason. Yeah? And I thought that was quite interesting, actually. You know, I can remember, I think the longest time I've ever spent in an organisation was 8 years, and when I left, my mum went mental. It's like, what are you doing? You've only been there 8 years. What do you think the other extreme is? When I said to them, when you see someone's been at an organisation for a certain amount of time, and you're beginning to think, ooh, that might be more of a problem than a benefit. How long do you think that was? How long do you think staying in one organisation in this country before people get a bit twitchy about, oh, I wonder how institutionalised they are? What do you think people say?
Between 6 and 8?
They said 6. 6 years. It's interesting. Now, this is just anecdotal stuff, but I think it's indicative of how mindsets, philosophies are beginning to change. I think you've also got this piece going on where, when I first started in industry, you tended to have a few years where we described it as an employee-centric market and a few years where we described it as an employer-centric market. It strikes me now that particularly if you are really good at what you do, actually it's, you know you're good at it, and you do have quite a lot of choice. You can hawk your skills a little bit to the highest bidder. Would you disagree with that? Do you think that actually for top talent actually has quite a lot of power in this country at least? Yeah? So we know that's going on. We know it's acceptable to move more often. And we know also, sorry Anna, I keep studying your way, but stop. We know also that there is much more of a sort of a deliberate nature to sort of the way that people plan careers now. Far less sort of accidentalness about careers. People are beginning to plan and say, well, actually, I want a bit of this, and I want a bit of this, and I want a bit of that. That's going to put me in a great position. It's a bit like you might have thought yourselves about, well, maybe I've been in a local role or a regional role. What I could really do with now is a few years in a global role. That would then help me move it. People are beginning to plan. So do we all agree that that's kind of going on? Right. So why is it then that often what you see is a slightly different mindset actually in our organisations? Even if we poach somebody from another organisation, there seems to be very often an implicit assumption that, okay, yeah, they're here to stay now. Or, we start thinking much longer term about the careers that we think people will have with us. And we get to this point where maybe in 2 years they move on, and they've left us in a bit of a pickle, because now we haven't got adequate succession. But let's also think about the money. So how many of your organisations perhaps use search organisations to help you with recruitment? Many of you? Okay. Well, I won't talk specifics, but if you think about the type of money that you spend going out to search and trying to find a senior leader, if you think about how much you then pay them, if you think about, remember the days when we used to get bonuses? If you think about, if you have a bonus, how much that might be, and then you think about repeating all of that for another year, and then they leave. Now, I did some math on this a while ago, and for the average sort of senior leader, this can easily add up to about £350,000. That's without uplift. Okay? And yet we feel we've only really got started with the value that we've got back from them. So what I'm just wondering is that a bit of a knowing-doing gap? I'm not suggesting that we change our approach to all roles ever in an organisation, but surely there must be some sense of how do we shorten the payback period for these kind of people, these kind of roles, when we know it's very expensive to bring them in. We also, let's be fair, there's a fair likelihood that if they're as good as we think they are, they might at some point go somewhere else. And it might not be because we're rubbish. It might be because that's just part of their plan. And so, to what degree could we use more of an assignment mentality? Let's imagine that we're bringing somebody into our business. Let's imagine that we've actually poached them from another organisation. We know who they are, we know what they've got, we know we need it, we know they're good. Maybe we've paid quite a lot of money to bring them in. Do we want to, A, drop them into a long-term career structure, just hope at some point they'll work their way up it if they still want to stay with us? Or would we be better off beginning to sort of break down career into more manageable chunks, where we say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put you straight away on this big strategic assignment. You're going to help us set up a business in Brazil, whatever it is. And actually, let's treat it a bit like a short-term contract. Let's be brave. Let's defer some of the reward to the end. Let's stop talking about there's a big difference between a 2-year contract and a career, because as we've already established, there probably isn't a big difference in terms of tenure. So why couldn't we say to somebody, come into our organisation, work on this for 2 years, at the end of that 2 years, let's get together, let's see what's been delivered, let's make sure you've been rewarded for doing what you've done, and let's have a conversation like adults. Let's have a conversation about, do we see something else that you can do to add value in our organisation, and do you still want to be here? And if so, let's do it again. Let's formalise it in a different way. And if not, well, you know what, maybe we part. But we'll have configured the commercials in a different way, won't we? We'll have got much more back in a much shorter space of time for these individuals. And I'm just wondering if there's room within some of our talent approaches to think a little bit more like this. Not everywhere, but just in some key areas. And think much more about what I call an exchange of mutual value. Because to a degree, we are bringing someone in to get something from them. But in today's talent market, they are expecting to get something from us. The difference is, they may be expecting to get something from us in about 2 to 3 years. Our mindset often is we're expecting to get something from them in 5 to 10. We may never get there. So this is just one of the sort of paradoxes that I just want to throw out there. I'm not suggesting that we completely rip up what we're doing across the talent landscape. But there may well be some instances where we need to think differently to really adapt to a trend that we all kind of talk about, but we don't really do anything about. You've got a question?
Yeah. Are you promoting this as a general approach or as an additional approach in selected cases?
At the moment, in 2014, I'm suggesting there may be room for thinking like this in some specific roles and some specific recruitment assignments, for example. It won't hurt to have that commercial mindset to our approach to talent, full stop. I just think at the moment it would be a very big change to make. But where we are talking about going to get top talent from other organisations, I think we need to actually look at our own organisation and say, well, sooner or later someone may do that to us. So let's just make sure that we have got the value that we need in the time we may have, and that we have also given something back. That way everybody leaves as friends, if that's what's going to happen. And I do think that there is room for this. I perennially see organisations who are left at the altar by a key person leaving, and it's like they never saw it coming. They look at the CV and say, well, they've spent 2 years in every organisation. We've just poached them from a competitor, and then somehow I'm surprised that they only spent 2 years with us.
Even worse is if someone leaves, it's such a traitorous thing to do, they can never darken our doorstep again. I find that a crazy kind of mentality.
I would love us to be more philanthropic about this. You know, in my dreams, in my HR dreams, I would love to see a situation where we conspired more to support people's career across other businesses. It would be really great if we were, sort of, let's imagine that Justine was working in our organisation, and actually we had a good 2 years, and then I sort of came to you one day and said, look, Justine, in terms of what we really do in our organisation and the way that you're developing and what you want from your career, in the next 6-9 months, we're going to sort of move apart a little bit. And the danger is that we end up trying to create something a bit fiddly just to keep you, whereas you want to move on, your motivation, or maybe even your CV, it's a bit diluted, you fall into that no man's land of a role that doesn't mean anything, just to keep you. So what I'd love to say to you would be, you know what, so let's plan for what you do next, and maybe what you do is you go and work for this organisation over here, or this kind of organisation, learn this stuff, and then come back and do this role in our organisation. Wouldn't that be great? Now that's quite altruistic, but in a way it's going with the flow, the tide of what's happening in the talent market anyway.
So there is a role model for this, which is in the academia, where if you want to get a good professorship or lectureship, you need to go to another place, particularly to an Ivy League US university or so, to go back then to your home or another university in Europe.
I wouldn't really know because I'm not an academic, as you can tell. I'm an engineer. But there probably is.
One idea. I'm not sure if it's working properly well at this time, but there are some examples.
The way I kind of look at it is, it's happening anyway. So do we want to be fighting it, or do we want to use it? Now actually, you do see this very, very rarely, but you do see some of these development partnerships between organisations who perhaps are in a similar geographical area, where they are really trying, sort of recognising that they are moving people around. And they do occasionally get together and sort of say, well, look, let's have a joint talent planning session. You know, a couple of your guys come and work for us, a couple of our guys come and work for you. Everyone's a winner. And I think this is going to become more of a trend. It's just my view, because it's happening anyway. Why would we fight it when we can use it? Okay. So as a concept, does that make some sense? Yeah. Okay. Let's look at another one. Why do so many talent managers approaches focus on one thing when our business strategy implies another? Now this is one of those things that I'm afraid does annoy me a little bit, particularly because one of my specialty areas is around organisational capability and risk. So what do I see? What I see is CEOs, CFOs and others standing up and saying, this is what our organisation is trying to achieve, and this is what it means. And then I go into HR functions or other parts of the business, and what I see is lots of stuff going on, but it doesn't necessarily match what we're trying to produce. There's a bit of an accidental overlap in some places. Now, this isn't to say that it's all like that, but I think this is a common issue. What I'm really looking for is if the organisation is trying to move from A to B, I want to be able to see that in the talent approaches. I get the same feeling with HR strategies. You know, so many HR strategies, if you take the logo off the bottom right-hand corner, it could be any business. Yeah? If your organisation is changing, you should see that DNA coming through people activity. So there is this growing focus around organisational capability and risk. What I mean by that, I mean, if I'm now going to adopt the role of CEO, so I'm just promoting myself. I'm now CEO of a business, and you're analysts. So I'm talking to you about what we're going to do, which is largely described as we're going to increase value in this organisation over time, however value is described, monetary terms, whatever. And what you do is actually you're sitting there, you're listening politely, but what you're really thinking is, I've heard all this before, so you're going to grow by geographical expansion or new product development or by acquisition or whatever it is. What you really want to know is, how the heck are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? And so you start asking me lots of tricky questions like, yeah, all right, yeah, fine. So just like everyone else in your sector, you're going to do this. Give me some confidence that you know what you're doing, you're actually going to do it. And this, by the way, feeds back to something called PE ratio. You know what, heard of PE ratio? Price earnings ratio? This is what ultimately describes confidence in your organisation if you are share driven, because it's what makes two companies with similar turnover seem differently attractive in terms of investment. So two organisations with the same turnover can have a widely different PE ratio. And the only difference really is the value that people put on intangibles, which in other words is how confident do we feel that you're going to put action behind the words. And if you're talking about a strategy where everyone in the room can go, I don't know how you're going to do that, your PE ratio will be depressed. If actually you're sitting there and giving a cogent explanation of what you're going to do, the strategies you're going to put in place the capability you need, then actually people go away with a nice warm feeling. And analysts should always leave, this is a tip, when you become CEOs, analysts should always leave with a warm feeling. Okay? And actually key to that is talent. Key to that is actually, do I understand what talent I need, and do I have a cogent strategy to put it in place? More and more we're under cost pressures, increasing regulatory pressures. How many of you work in regulated industries? Yeah? What, financial? Yeah. Yeah. So you've got financial, health, pharmaceutical, aerospace, whatever. Increasing regulatory pressures. And this piece around critical roles and critical talent has kind of emerged out of this because we can't spend all this money everywhere at the same time. So actually we have to be a bit more focused about it. So all the stuff on the left is saying we have to be a bit more selective by understanding which areas of talent are most cost effective to support. And yet, often there is this lack of strategic context to some of the talent decisions that we make. When we talk about our strategy, do we actually understand ahead of time which specific skills that will require and where the risks are? The example I often use is digital. How many of your organisations have either a digital element or e-commerce element of your strategy or something that's sort of indirectly related to that? Most of you, I reckon, yeah? Now this is an interesting one because you know what? Everybody does. So the first question, the obvious question is, where are all these guys coming from? Yeah? The second question is, that's going to have quite a big bearing on your ability to source it and the change in your organisation. Because these guys are generally going to be younger. So straight away, we're not just talking about recruitment question. We're talking about your employer brand. We're talking about your policies. We're talking about flexible working. We're talking about technology strategies. We're talking about how people want to be managed, what they want to wear. Have we really thought about what that simple statement of we're going to be 40% omnichannel means in terms of talent? And in most cases, the answer is not really. So we're going to be surprised, not necessarily in a good way. So it's also hard to know where to focus. Particularly if you work in HR, it's all about doing more for less. So when you look at your to-do list, it all looks important. Ultimately, some of it has to be more important than some other bits because you only have enough money to do most of it. So you need to be able to understand which talent or which people activities are the most important. And at the same time, when we do talk about talent, we often talk about it quite a narrow way. You may not be like this, but a lot of organisations I see do have this big focus on the top right-hand box in your 9-box grid, the future stars, the next CEOs. Well, if you're a technological or IP or innovation-based business, you probably need specialists even more. Yeah. So are we actually, even the way that we're talking about talent, is that matching what our strategy needs to deliver? Because if you are an innovation or product-led organisation, you're not going to be very successful by having 220 CEOs. You're probably going to be a bit more successful by having one and a load of people who are great at what they do in terms of product innovation. So what could we do? Well, we could do more to consider the talent implications of strategy. This is where strategic workforce planning has come from. Interestingly, it's an area I specialise in. Over 50% of the requests that I get globally to work on strategic workforce planning do not come from HR. They come from CEOs and boards. Yeah, they get it. People risk. Actually, in HR, we need to get with the programme. Which talent needs are most critical? Well, strategic workforce planning will tell you that. And we need to align our processes to address this most efficiently. We need to actually look at recruitment, development, reward, etc., and tweak it to make sure that it's actually appealing to, attracting, retaining the talent that is most critical to our organisation. And that will mean changing some stuff, potentially. Changing some stuff. This is just a picture I use to describe where that conversation happens around a talent strategy or talent context. We've got what the business is delivering to its outside stakeholders up here in terms of confidence. We've got a whole load of stuff. The group noun for this is called people stuff. A load of people stuff there. And what pulls it all together is this piece in the middle that makes sure that this is aligned to manage the risks coming out of the business strategy that pertain to people and organisation. Number 3, there's only 4, so we're all right for time. See Andy beginning to twitch.
That's not about time.
Is it not about time? Process versus outcome. So this is a bit about measurement. Let me tell you a story. I work with a very, very large organisation, actually. And I was talking about succession planning. I said, oh, how is your succession planning? They said, it's brilliant. It's green on our red, amber, green chart. Well, straight away I was impressed. I said, yeah, out of our top 200 roles, we have 98% ready now successor coverage. Now, actually, I thought, first of all, I thought, goodness, I think is the word I'm allowed to use here. Goodness. That's really good. I don't know anyone who's got 98% coverage of top 200 roles of ready now successors. And because I don't know anyone, I didn't believe it. What does 98% coverage with ready now successors actually mean? What's it actually mean?
Most of them are going to leave.
Yeah. But even if it were true, what are you actually measuring? I'll tell you what it means. It means that we have 200 boxes and 4 of them are empty. It doesn't tell me whether or not John Smith is successor to 42 roles, which can happen. It doesn't tell me whether Jane Jones, who's successor to this critical role, is even with the business anymore. But more to the point, it doesn't tell me what actually happens. So in that same organisation, I sent them away to do a little bit of research, and I said, let's reframe that process measure as an outcome measure. The outcome measure is when a role becomes available in the top 200, on what percentage of occasions is it filled by the named successor? That's the outcome measure. Guess what 98% became? And guess low. Go on, have a go. Sorry?
0.
No, it was more than 0. It was more than 0. It was 8. 8%. So is it green now? It's bright cherry red. And what we've just done that HR function has just done has papered over a massive business risk and a massive business cost by measuring entirely the wrong thing. So we've got all this focus on business outcome. We've got this huge rise in the need to focus on talent insight through data. We in HR need to continually prove to the organisation about the value that we bring. Caroline was very clear about that as well. We need to optimise our processes, sure, but actually how often do we have a strong bias towards process metrics? Take performance management. 9 out of 10 organisations, when you say to them, what do you measure in performance management? They say whether or not the forms come back on time. So, okay, so it's 96% this year, it was 95% last year. Doesn't tell me whether people are being asked to do the right thing. Yeah? Talent reviews. How often do we use talent reviews to sort of talk about people? And then what happens? Nothing. We've got the data, we've got all the sheets of paper, we've done that big book for the group talent review that's taken us about 4 months. But how often does it get translated into things that actually happen? How often do we go back and check if they've happened? Sometimes. Often not. And how often do we have a lovely pack for our board, a load of people information? But how often is it just information, not insight? I'll give you an example. So are we measuring the risk to strategy delivery that come out of strategic workforce management? Sometimes we are. Often we're not. How many measure attrition? Yeah? Or regretted losses, whatever it is. Often we'll say attrition is 21%, whatever, 13, 14%. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it depends. Depends where it is and who it is. But attrition in a strategically important population of 5% might be really bad. If it's attrition in a part of the organisation where next year we're going to have some compulsory redundancy, so the question might be how to make it more. Yeah, it's meaningless without context. Are we looking at how effective our talent processes are? I love this one. Go back and look through 3 years' worth of talent data, and then ask the question, of the people we said were great 3 years ago, what happened to them? Are they still here? Did they deliver on their potential? Have they moved up the organisation? We did this in an organisation, a big FMCG organisation. And what they did was they graded potential from sort of A, which was, why the heck aren't you already in a bigger role, down to B, which is, we should look for one now, C, which was continue in your current role, in other words, wait. D was not keeping up, E was too early to say. So C was continue doing what you're doing now. Okay, we went back and we looked at, it was actually over 5 years, where did promotions come from? 75% of all promotions came from band C. People we said weren't ready for promotion. So what's going on? Something is wrong. Now that's insight, because you're going back and saying this doesn't make sense, let's find out what's going on. So we really need to think about how we measure things. Are we making good correlations? For example, are some managers better at nurturing future leaders than others? Do people from particular sector backgrounds tend to do well in our culture? Yeah? Here's some examples. Talked about that one. Looking at the pattern on your 9 boxes, and say, what does that mean in terms of risk? Have we got too many people who are too good? In which case, maybe we're going to have some retention issues. Percentage of critical roles with emergency cover. This is a nice one. I get asked all the time, Nick, what is the ideal ratio of internal versus external recruitment? Well, there isn't one. It's whatever your strategy requires. Sometimes you might want one part of the business to be entirely external. Sometimes you might want to be internal. The important thing is to minimise the number of times you go externally simply because it doesn't work internally. Now, that's a useful measure. It can be done as part of the workflow approval system in recruitment. Attrition in specific skill sets critical for strategy. If we're doing something new and the people we need probably haven't heard of us, it might be interesting to find out if over time that changes. We can use third parties or recruitment suppliers to help us with that. And things like percentage of those identified as being ready now who actually do get promoted. There are all kinds of smart, insightful measures that are very different often to what we use. And then lastly, generational factors. So we've already begun a little bit of a discussion about this. The number of times that we talk about things like this, and yet when we look at our organisations, we understand some of this stuff on the right, we understand this work-life balance piece, we understand career expectation. There's a lot of people at the moment, by the way, saying that the generation of people coming into our organisations now have unrealistically high career expectations that probably can't be met or are actually, quote, unreasonable. Now that might well be right, but it's still something you're going to have to deal with. A big focus on values. I think we mentioned CSR. What we do know about is that the generations coming into the workplace now are much more focused on it. Yeah, those of you who work in banking may have seen some of this. And also, I think we've just recently this year hit the 4 generations concurrently in the workplace milestone, which is an interesting one. And yet, we're quite scared of this, aren't we? It's kind of it feels like an all or nothing thing, open the floodgates thing. We don't really, I think, in some organisations know what to do with that. I think we are probably underthinking some of the cultural issues. What happens when we're trying to build a new business within an old business with a group of people who think and behave completely differently? Do we actually go for a structural solution when we try and keep the two separate? Or do we actually run the risk of one culture contaminating the other? And also, when we look at our technology, as we've said, it is a bit clunky, isn't it? Does it need to be like that? Yeah? Are some of the things that we worry about in terms of technology, particularly working in financial services, are they really risks? Or do we just think they're risks? And if actually, by putting in place some of the controls that we do, we're actually increasing risk. I'll use the example of laptops, just so you know, I'm having a chip wag about this. I worked in financial services. I had this laptop. I couldn't do a thing with it. The only reason I carried it around was if I got mugged, I could hit someone with it, because it weighed about 3 kilos. Yeah? But I couldn't actually plug it into anything. I couldn't plug anything into it. The danger is that highly motivated employees who want to do the best work around these systems. And, for example, email stuff home so you can work on it over the weekend, thereby increasing risk. So we have to get some balance on these things. Flexible working. How flexible is it really? Who's doing part-time, term time? Yeah. So, I think we need to make sure our employer model is relevant. We need to really challenge ourselves around some of the risks or perceived risks around flexibility of technology and policies. And I think more and more we have to get this lovely piece around brand about matching the external hype with the internal reality. Because guess what? These guys can now vote with their feet. And you know what? They will. Okay, so there's a very brief tour through just 4 such sort of areas. We took a couple of questions as we went through, and I'm also aware of time. It took a little bit longer than that than I imagined, but I got so excited. But are there just a couple of questions that I could maybe squeeze in? Yeah, absolutely.
If you were early part of the presentation, you talked about some people who stay a couple of years. Why would large companies want to employ somebody with that track record? I mean, is their skill so unique that they couldn't grow their own, or would they not better, in terms of return on investment, be better at looking at somebody whose track record was staying 4 years?
It might be. I think you have to look at what's happening out there and ask yourself the question, do I want to fight it? Or do I want to work around it, or do I want to go with it? I think what we understand is it is going on. And what we also understand is the better you are, the more likely you are to be able to get away with it. So if we put ourselves in the position of the people, of the employees, they may well be trying to do this. It might be their strategy. And so, to a degree, because they can do it, probably will do it. Because each time they move, maybe they're going to need a bit more money, they build that portfolio, it helps them get up the ladder. So it's going on. And we can either get with the program or not with the program. We might have some tactics that we can use to lessen the impact on us. So we might look at it and say, we're having to spend so much on external recruitment that even if we change our approach to what we ask them to do, it's not paying back. So maybe we'll try and develop some of our own skills. And actually, you see this with digital marketing. Some people are sort of sitting there and saying, we're paying over the odds for this, there aren't enough of them out there, so we are going to train our own. It's going to be more expensive short term but cheaper long term. So I think there is this tactical approach. But let's recognise it's going on and come up with a conscious strategy rather than an accidental one. Okay. Any other questions? Hello.
Hello. My name is Erkan Schreiber from Zeppelin. And we did just a nice study on the future of work for UKCES, jobs and skills in 2030. So the overall picture is the complexity is rising because you're having all the different generations, the four generations at the workplace, with different working modes and different attitudes of how long to stay in the company and so on. So just from the perspective of UKCES, which is one of the organizations who wants to push the companies to take more responsibility for upskilling, and your perspective, which we completely share, that portfolio careers are the future, and the share of portfolio careers will increase much more. What do you think will be the right strategy to fulfill your responsibility as employer for upskilling while you're not aware or you're not the uncertainty of the...
I think I understand. I'm having a go at answering it. Because the generic answer I would give on this is not to have all your eggs in one basket. So in other words, flexibility is going to be key. You see this with workplace design. I did a lot of research recently about how different generational factors, what they want from the workforce. And it's all actually saying that if you want to really appeal to these different groups of people, you just need to be a bit flexible about the things you do, not be all one thing or another. And I think it's the same with, for example, policies and benefits. It's the same with engagement. We were talking about engagement briefly. All the research around engagement is saying that, guess what? Employees are consumers. Well. So maybe we should have a segmented approach to that, and maybe that when that reflects on our policies, it means that we just need to have a bit of flex to be able to offer a bit of choice, but within a left and a right that makes sense to us economically and from a complexity point of view in an organisation, which is rather like, making stuff and selling it to people. Yeah. So all the evidence I'm seeing is that to deal with this complexity, we just have to be a bit more flexible, maybe work with a bit more pragmatism, and be sort of have that freedom within a framework approach, rather than just saying we're going to invest everything here or invest everything here. Okay. Just conscious of time.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
So, some of the thinking and some of the theory, I think it's going to be good now to listen to Steen de Greur. Steen is going to give us a case study on hyperconnectivity in the business. It'll be interesting to see how things are happening on the ground. Again, an interesting background. You started out supply side on assessment and selection, and Steen subsequently has been at both Goodyear and now Swarovski as part of the global talent management leadership team. So, welcome, Steen.
Thank you. Can I suggest to the chairman that we give the audience like a 5 minutes break, because I think it's been a very long morning, and then I just set up
sounds like a plan to me. We've got another break after this session as well, but actually we're 45 minutes.
So that's 5 minutes from that longer break. Okay. Good. You got my first gift to you. 5 minutes.
You give it to me, take it.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Excited. My own business now. I want to. Your portfolio. There's also a lot of similarities there. That's for us. Boss Swarovski. I love to come and do it. Months with yourself. And it's like a project doing handles.
I do follow a retainer arrangement with organisations. It's cheaper than employing it. And I can do the concurrent so that I can just get paid increase for working in it. Yeah, that's the way to go.
From Germany. Germany.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You wouldn't want to use the microphone, or
No, I'll be fine.
what I might do, because we were actually recording the sessions. I mean, if it's okay with you, if it's okay to record. I might put the mic on you, but what I'll do is I'll lower the level in the room completely, so it's basically purely for the record.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first of all, I need to thank Nick for a kind of perfect introduction. I must say I really recognize myself and things I've been trying to achieve with different HR teams and different HR companies. Very, very much challenges that I recognize. What I'll do today in the next half an hour, 45 minutes, is I'll do some storytelling, but I'll make it extremely concrete, where I think Nick was quite strategic. I'll really talk from some experience, from recent experience. No, strategic. It really resonated to me, but I was happy that you didn't bring the same examples as I'm actually bringing today. So I'm really going to talk from some examples from my recent past and experience with Goodyear and Swarovski. And since a few months, I actually run my own business called Talmundo, and we actually consult quite a few global organizations on talent and L&D. So I got a few nice examples from that nice little world as well. Just about me, in a few words. So this is my career portfolio. Discovered a new name for it now. Sounds much better than job hopping, right? A career portfolio. So I started off at Cubix, which is actually a UK-based HR consulting firm, similar to SHL CEB, very much in the assessment and development space. I stayed there for 7 years. I cannot imagine I will ever stay for 7 years again at any other company. But I had a great time. It was my first employer. I think I was reading at some point that your first employer is the most difficult one to say kind of goodbye to. You got some kind of emotional connection. Got lots of opportunities there. At some point, I was recruited by Goodyear. I'm sure you all know Goodyear, the tire company. The joke I always used to crack was like, does anybody know Goodyear? Yes, we do. Does anybody know what kind of tires you have under your car? No, we don't. So nobody cares. Which was quite of a challenge, I must say, especially for our marketeers, which then links to our HR strategy at some point as well. People kind of knew the brand, but do people care? I then moved to a brand, to cut a long story short, moved to a brand that people did care about, which was way less essential than tires, but seemed to be way more important, especially for women. So that was a great time. So I actually did an assignment, as I was explaining to Nick. I was full-time employed, actually officially 4 days a week, by Swarovski on an 18-month assignment where I helped them to set up the global talent management function. So it was non-existing. It was a very decentralized business. At some point, about 2 years ago, they did decide to go and centralize it in Switzerland to build up centers of expertise, one of them being talent management. I got to know them on a conference. So first of all, if you want to get a new job, make sure you're the next speaker, because that's how you get jobs and opportunities, to be honest. I mean, I met Swarovski on a conference in Barcelona about 2.5 years ago, and that's where they asked me if I could join their team to set up global talent management. At that time, I already had the plan to set up my own business. I was getting a little impatient here. I was getting a little tired of corporate as well. Corporate in the negative sense. A lot of politics, very difficult to get things moving. Very much concentrated on getting the succession deck ready every year, spending weeks and months on producing an Excel that some people were reading that particular day and nobody was sticking to later. So that kind of frustrated me. So I'm like, okay, I need to do something different. Swarovski was great. There was nothing there, so you could build up from scratch. Still, I had this desire to go and just do my own thing. And very much have the passion for L&D, so that's most of the projects that I'm doing right now. And I'm actually still working with Swarovski, because part of the plan is to actually professionalize their L&D approach. So we're kind of upgrading their L&D approach, but I'm doing it from my own business with our team. And actually, Goodyear is still a client as well. So I'm still kind of working with these two companies. I'm Belgian, by the way. You probably can tell that I'm not native English speaker. Are there any non-UK people here as well? Or, yeah, okay. Yeah, I heard some Germans and some. Where was the other? Just the accent. That's quite obvious. I was at a Russell Brand show last night. Anybody know Russell Brand here in the UK? The guy's incredible. He performed in Brussels last night. That's why I was late, by the way, today, because I really didn't want to miss the show. So I was on the early Eurostar train, but still too late to make it. He was making a few jokes about Belgians and Germans. And anyway, anything you know about Belgium, by the way? There, yeah, okay, at least one thing, yeah. It's usually horrible if I travel, and I've been traveling quite a bit over the last 5-6 years, and people ask you, oh, where you come from? Belgium. Oh, When's our next meeting? So that's a good thing as well, because there's no kind of emotion around Belgium, which could be really negative in a way. I mean, there's no emotion. If you talk, I'm French or I'm German, or people think, okay, I'm against or I'm in favor, or there's stereotypes around these people. Around Belgians, no. So that's why we delivered the European president, for example, because nobody cares. There's no emotion around the guy. We just put him there, and nobody kind of disagrees. Nobody agrees, but at least nobody disagrees. So that's what makes it interesting also working in large organizations as a Belgian, because usually if they put the Belgians, like, yeah, okay, Belgian, that's like, we don't have a negative feeling, not a positive either, but at least not negative. Anyway, I'm kind of sidetracking a little bit. Let's move on to this. I was, before I went to the Russell Brand show last night, I was reflecting on, okay, what I'm going to talk about. Shall I pull out the usual talent management pitch presentation, like this is proper talent management, this is what I've done? No, because I thought the topic was quite specific today. It's about hyper-connected workforce. And when I was reminding myself about this topic last night, I was, oh my God, what did I sign up to? Do I have something to say about this? I think, yes, I do. I went digging into my experience at Swarovski and at Goodyear especially. And there's quite a few examples that I want to bring today. And first of all, I thought, and the question has already been answered by Nick, I think, is it just about being hyper-connected? When I was reading the agenda, I was like, there's a lot of focus here on this hyper-connected thingy. Isn't it much more than being hyper-connected? And I'll answer it for you. I think, yes, it's a whole new generation that comes to work with maybe a different set of values, a different way of being educated. They grew up in a world where, at least in the Western world, where there was peace, and people could actually, there was no war. People could actually educate themselves, could go to school, etc. People became much more vocal, etc. So hyper-connectivity is one of the characteristics, I think, of that new workforce, which is joining right now. But it's not just, I'm not going to look at it in isolation, because I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And are we really? I mean, I was fascinated by Mark Zuckerberg's presentation a couple of weeks back when he was at the Mobile Forum in Barcelona. He's doing this initiative called Internet.org, which makes you realize that what we're talking about is like relevant for maybe 2% of the global workforce. When we talk about top talent and talk about being hyper-connected, the world's not hyper-connected at all. There's billions of people who don't have internet, who don't have a smartphone, who don't have a tablet. So just to make sure that we keep that in mind, whatever I'm going to talk about as well applies on a market like the UK, like the Netherlands, like Belgium. Great. It doesn't apply on, for example, some of the emerging markets. If you need to go and look for talent in Zambia, because that's where you're going to start a retail chain, it's not going to work. Facebook is not going to give you the candidates that you're looking for example. So you need to kind of put it into perspective sometimes, what we're doing in the world we're living in. And is it a good or a bad thing, being hyper-connected? What do you think? Both? Yeah? I think with many of these things, it's just what Nick said as well. It's a matter of accepting it. It's not good or bad. It doesn't even, I mean, it's really a loss of energy if you go off and discuss whether it's a good or a bad thing, whether people should be addicted to their smartphones, yes or no, whether as a manager you should worry about the fact that somebody's checking his LinkedIn profile. It's just a fact. Whether you feel good or bad about it, it's there. It's not going to change. So to me, it's there. I enjoy the hyper-connected world myself, although there's a watch out for me personally as well to not kind of almost be addicted to my different social media accounts and news that's coming in all the time. So it's just there, not necessarily good or bad, I would say. Depends on how you look at it. Two very simple slides. And this is where I'm going to talk a bit about experience, really. Opportunities. And this is, I should have put in brackets, some opportunities. These are not all opportunities. Like Russell Brand was saying yesterday, I mean, how can, on the BBC, people call it the news? It's not the news. It's some news, which we kind of filtered for you already in our kind of value system, etc. which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it. So these are just some opportunities which I happen to reflect upon because I had to do with it at these various companies. For example, when I was thinking about being hyper-connected, what's good about it? What's the opportunity? What I thought was amazing is that I initially spent 150,000 euros with a company called Universum. Anybody knows Universum? Yeah, great company. Anybody from Universum? Okay, so I can talk about Universum in a more 3D way. So Universum does, for those who don't know Universum, employer brand research. So they go out to students and young professionals around the world. They got these panels, and they actually send them a questionnaire about your company. They complete it, and then you kind of figure out how attractive you are. To cut a long story short, they also got this famous employer brand index, which they feature in the Financial Times, etc. So when I started at Swarovski, one of the key objectives was we need to become an attractive employer. So we wanted to know where we are. Where are we today? What's our point zero measurement? So I worked with Universum for almost a year to get a pulse check in like 15 countries around the world about how attractive we are. Tons of people involved, a lot of costs. Great team on the Universum side, must say, great account management. However, 12 months later, I discovered in an account management meeting with the guys from LinkedIn who were selling us some recruiter licenses, etc., that they, with almost one push on a button, could give me the same data. Actually, way better data. Because I didn't know really who was in that panel in Malaysia from Universum. I asked them a few times. We were like, yeah, we work with universities, and they get a database. We can't tell you who's in the database exactly because that's kind of data protection. But there's 67 people from Malaysia who completed your survey. So don't worry, it's there, it's validated. With LinkedIn, I got like an analysis of 250,000 clicks on Swarovski-related stuff on LinkedIn. Company page, jobs that we were posting, etc., etc. And they could easily benchmark that to a lot of other global employers around the world. So hyper-connectivity of our generation, in that sense, was great. Because with one click, and with only 15,000 euros, I could get a much better report on how attractive we are, based on LinkedIn data. But then again, almost all the people that I was looking for were on LinkedIn. So it was, to me, very relevant. So it was like, okay, I just spent 12 months working with Universum trying to get these numbers, and now LinkedIn's telling me they can get it with one click. And they could. It was good stuff. I'm not paid by LinkedIn, by the way, at all. Another one was we at Swarovski were looking for tons of retail talent around the world. And one of my jobs was to standardize how we were going to campaign towards retail talent, how we're going to find them, and how we're going to recruit them, assess them. And we put up a system, and it kind of featured in the UK press at some point as well, I believe, where we worked with SHL CEB to set up an online, what we called retail talent selection platform. So kind of a virtual world in which you are being immersed, a virtual store, Swarovski store, and 18 different situations are happening, officially called situational judgment, but really kind of pimped from what we all know. Situational judgment, usually you get like 3 sentences. You have to kind of imagine a situation, then there's a multiple choice. Instead of the 3 sentences, you get really like a video which plays with avatars with you in a role of a future sales professional, and all kinds of things are happening, and you need to answer. So a great way for us that was, and I'm going to try to pop up the presentation, my Swarovski database. I think still. So you have a bit of an idea. Yeah. So actually what we've done is to access the assessment, you could actually go to the Facebook Swarovski careers page. It's still there, by the way, so you can take it. You can just apply whatever fake application for a store in London. And then if you do that, if you first check out the employer brand material and you feel like I want to apply for Swarovski, you're going to be redirected to the SHL website, but you don't even notice. It's all kind of the same brand. And you're going to take the online retail talent selection assessment, which is kind of looking like this. This is your manager who's welcoming you. This is the client's going to walk in who's completely upset because the piece of jewelry you bought the other day is already broke, etc. So 18 different situations based on an ideal sales consultant model, which is going to give you, which was giving us a great first filter of of people. And what all of a sudden happened in only 3-4 months' time in the initial pilot countries, we got great response on the assessment through Facebook, because, I mean, we've done some research, of course. Nearly all the people that we were trying to get were on Facebook. They had a Facebook profile and were active Facebook profile users. So actually, we found them through Facebook, and we gave them the opportunity to immediately apply, immediately get into the assessment, and immediately get a first feedback on the assessment as well. So our pipeline was just growing and growing every day. People finding us, people immediately being assessed, and we could immediately continue with the people who made it through. And so there's some kind of threshold that we use. So again, their hyperconnectivity, great. In this case, extremely positive, because all of the talent that we were looking for was basically on Facebook. So we put our assessment there, and it actually works. Huge cost saving. This was probably the only HR project, I have to admit, where I could black and white prove to a CEO, this is what it brings us. This is what we saved in terms of advertising around the world. This is what we paid as HLCB. That's the license and stuff. Facebook, by the way, up until today is still free for companies. I guess they're going to change one day, but it's still free. And we did a little bit of campaigning through the stores. So we've done some nice collaterals, which we put in the stores. You can apply through Facebook. So little money. And we connected it to our applicant tracking system. So a clear return on investment, which was very provable, which was great. So that was one of the examples where hyperconnectivity actually is a lot of fun. Going back, all the other people who were non-retail, by the way, we got through LinkedIn again. So the two platforms we were really using was, I mean, Swarovski obviously is a retail business, so everybody's in retail. But Facebook really worked for retail. LinkedIn worked for almost other profiles, except for Germany, where you use a platform called Xing, because that's what Germany still kind of prefers. But if you add Xing to it, we were finding a lot of retail and a lot of corporate staff. Again, China was a little different. There's no Facebook in China. There's a thing called Weibo, etc. So, but we almost copied what we were doing on Facebook onto the local platform in China. What I do like about hyperconnectivity, you like it or not, is candidates and employees are reachable 24/7 on multi-devices. Again, you may interpret it as a bad thing. It can also be a good thing. And that also links to what Nick was talking about, multi-devices. I've seen the first few companies now taking the risk of allowing a thing called an iPad on their networks, or just allow people to basically use them. People were bringing them anyway. So I've just done a project that was already on the Tom Windows side for a company I'm sure you all know. And this was the revolution we brought. So don't get too excited. I'm pushing this app icon here. And this is a wheel that tells you about the essentials of performance feedback. It's got all kinds of details about performance feedback, how to give feedback, various case studies, etc. The content here is not important. The thing is that this app was a total revolution at Allianz. I'm sure you all know Allianz, big insurance, 150,000 people. So I was talking to them because I happen to know their head of talent quite well. And they were like, I mean, we're again going to talk about performance management for the 10th year in a row. We're again producing our brochure. Is nothing else we can possibly do to get people's attention or to make it easy? I said, yeah, why didn't you do an app? An app? It's like, yeah, everybody seems to have a tablet, so why don't you do an app? IT security, blah, blah, blah. She was brave enough to not involve IT security. Great. So she's for a company like Allianz. So I'm kind of challenging you because Allianz is kind of up there in terms of security and regulation. And she said, look, you know what? We're just going to do it. I'm going to give me a version that I can put under our LMS as well. So I've got the official version under the learning management system, etc. Again, very hard to reach. Nobody likes the system. You got 4 steps until you get to it. But we'll do the app then as well. In the first week, we got 5,000 downloads of the app onto tablets from Allianz managers. Because you know what? They just enjoy the simplicity of this. It's not about the content here. It's just they got it on their iPad, they tick the icon, as I just did, and they're on it. So now we're going to do a few more things there because it got accepted. IT got involved in some points, like, well, what are you guys doing here? It got through it. So now we're through. Now we can do stuff on tablets, which is just so much easier. And we also agreed, let's forget about the tracking. I remember I was implementing a learning management system at Goodyear called Moodle. It took me a year to get it implemented, and we're all very proud. But then again, we realized it's adding more complexity instead of taking away complexity. It's not simple. You need to create a course. People need to be linked to that course, otherwise they will not find it. They need to log in first. The auto login wasn't working for a year, so password to complete. Then you need to find a course, launch the course. That's already 3-4 clicks. It's not making it easy, especially with the new generation who's used to things to be as easy as what I just showed you, like just tick and I'm on. I'm ready to go. So again, this is a very simple thing. If I show this to professional app development company, or I show this to people like Google, for example, they will kind of laugh at me, like, are you kidding me? This is what we were doing 5 years ago. But I can tell you, if I show it to large companies, it's still like, really? Have you been able to do that? So yes, Allianz is doing that kind of stuff. That's, by the way, maybe slightly off track from hyperconnectivity, but I link it to kind of multi-device. People are checking emails, things like this, on their personal devices very often, gently ignoring the big 3-kilo laptop they got from Allianz. There's definitely some challenges as well. For example, things that I came up against. Do you need a social media policy? Nick already touched on it earlier. Any opinions? Do you have a social media policy, for example? Yeah. I was rolling out one at Swarovski as well, social media policy, 5 pages, what you can do and not do. Now we're working with for a big Dutch bank with a touch of orange. And they have great client to work for. However, they're really puzzled around social media policy. Should we have one? Shouldn't we? How far can we go? So now we're working with them to kind of not introduce it as a policy, but more as kind of as an exciting type of game in a virtual world where things could happen to you if you kind of make the wrong decisions around social media. But you can also create a positive buzz if you do things well. So how can you be a kind of promoter? So put it positively. The bottom line is a lot of companies are kind of thinking about what should we do here, because everybody's connected and we don't have control. If you have too much of a policy, the authenticity of your company is disappearing, and that's a nightmare on social media because people figure out immediately. My sister works for a big leading women's magazine in Belgium and the Netherlands, and her boss told her to take the social media role about 2 years ago. And the idea of her boss was like to completely script what was going to be posted and to have kind of automated replies almost for what people were saying. It's like a total disaster. People immediately figure out that things are not authentic. It's company-driven, corporate-driven. People are not on there to listen to corporate statements or to kind of things that are pre-sliced and diced. It needs to be authentic. So how can you keep that and still tell your people what maybe not to do? So that's definitely a challenge of being hyper-connected. Your own people are talking about your own company. How much control do you take? This is what I've seen quite a few times. Do your managers understand and accept a hyper-connected workforce or a new generation? Is your highly corporate culture ready for this generation? Now, not everybody, luckily, has a highly corporate culture. Again, the way I'm putting it here is rather negative. But I got frustrated by it a few times. And I can see that also at Swarovski, in some places, there was this focus on working hard, working long hours. You are dedicated to your job. If you do anything else than your job, we look at you like, what are you doing? Including, for example, just checking updating your LinkedIn or just go make a Facebook post, etc. I saw a lot of managers who felt very much old school, which was always interesting to me because a few of the projects that I've done were in L&D. If you got these guys on a leadership training, for example, and you talk about leadership principles, situational leadership, coaching, blah, 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 they know it. They know what to do in a best practice type of environment. They know that coaching is important. They know to give freedom to people, to empower them. Are they doing it? Absolutely not. So that's what I challenged the business schools with as well at the times. Like, how can you have some sort of guarantee that what people are going to learn, and they obviously already know about it, that they're actually going to apply it, because I'm not seeing it. At least for many, I'm not seeing it at all. So it's a funny one in terms of cultural shift. Every company, when you look at the value statements and what they stand for, it's all about openness, empowerment, and innovation, etc. And if you're really in there, you kind of wonder, really? I mean, this guy, this COO of the company, I mean, he's not living that at all. So it's a challenging one. So you see, I don't have the answers. I just have got a list of problems here. Power shift towards the employee side. I think it was mentioned before, but that's been a big shift. I remember my procurement colleagues told me as well, Stijn, we're in a difficult role these days, because you know what? It's the buyers who are in control today, not procurement. We used to have all information about products and prices and alternatives, etc. Now, you know what? The buyer is usually better equipped in terms of pricing and environment, etc., and discounts that he could possibly get than we are. So it's a difficult job. The same for employees. I mean, in 20 years ago, I mean, very few people knew about the salary they could possibly get. They could definitely not really compare it. Now you just go online, you put in the type of job, the experience, and that's the salary you should get as a minimum. So people know that. People are prepared. I've seen that some companies have a real difficulty accepting people who are much more vocal, who come in and say, this is what I've got to offer. You're happy to talk to me? Okay, you should be happy that you can talk to me, because I've got a bunch of talents here. I may consider to come and work for you for a couple of years at the most. And I know all about this job, and I know about the salary I should be getting, etc. So you get this, you can look at it as people being arrogant. You can also look at it as people being very confident and very motivated, very skilled, the fact that they're so prepared. Again, big clash sometimes with old school management. How to deal with short attention span. I think that's one that I struggled the most with, and trying to, for example, if you do an L&D, initiative, a leadership training, can you still do a leadership class with managers who are 30, 35 years old, put them in a room for a week, and let them listen to people like myself? That's definitely not going to work, like Nick maybe. But then you need a lot of skills, and you need to be a great facilitator, trainer, to take such a group through a 1 week experience and keep their attention. People in the old days, I was still more kind of, okay, I've been invited here. I'm very, very happy that I can actually attend. I'll sit here, I'll be quiet, and I will learn. Today, people will not. They look at their profiles, they check their email, they get impatient. It's just a fact, basically. So, and I've seen few, maybe a challenge for some of the business schools here. I've seen few business schools still adapting to that new reality. I was working with a Spanish business school at the time, very well respected, and they didn't have much of a solution for it. Luckily, they brought together a great bunch of speakers. They got a lot of external speakers, so a lot of variety. Still, a week off in a room was just a stretch. So I'm sure that, I mean, education and business schools, etc., and you see that in a lot of places now, are on a path of changing and catering to a workforce which has got different expectations, which you cannot get into a room for a week. You need to consider things like serious games to spice it up, or to do in between. E-learning, but then not e-learning like we know it, because it's got a very negative connotation, but e-learning 2.0, very interactive beforehand. So you just keep the real discussion and interactivity for the session. Yeah, true. I agree. I was, again, maybe too much referring a bit to our own little small world here, but indeed, if you go to China, Japan, still a very different culture in terms of receiving information, not being too vocal, listening, etc. And then the last bit I had, I think we talked about it already. Their private devices are faster, better, and stronger. So please let people use them. There's no danger. There's no danger out there at all. Like I showed from the Allianz example, it's just way much better and faster to use an iPad than using a clunky laptop, really. So, and there's so much more cool stuff that you can do. And that's, I think, that's maybe the closing thought. That's, I think, the challenge for all of us, HR professionals or talent management professionals, learning professionals. For some people will see this as very, very exciting, what's happening. And somebody referred to it as complexity. But there's a lot of people who are frightened as well. And they're kind of going to turn their back and it's like, I'm going to ignore this because myself, I don't know so much about apps and about all of this. So you know what? We just continue the old way. I think that's dangerous because you're going to be out of business at some point. So I think you better embrace it and try to make the best of it because to me, an HR role today has got so many more possibilities thanks to technology, the internet, people being hyper-connected. I see it as much more as an opportunity, sorry, than as a challenge or as a problem. And I think that's the way you kind of should look at it. Otherwise, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. That's it. Thank you.
I've got to say one last thing on the
Sure.
social media policy. I used to sit on the social media steering committee for Royal Bank of Scotland, which, as you can imagine, is a fascinating place to be. And particularly when the online banking went down. But it was interesting because we had legal, we had risk, we had governance, we had IT. I was representing corporate banking and corporate marketing. We had someone from retail, we had someone from property. There was probably 30 or 40 of us that actually sat on that committee. There was not a single person from HR or people. And this was like 5 years ago, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
Good. So I reckon we've got half an hour or so for a bit of coffee, in case we haven't had enough. And then we'll have one more session before